So let's talk about 10 of the units that rose up in the previous balanced data slate, which units got some of the biggest and most impactful buffs in current Warhammer 40k, and what are they going to do to you on the tabletop. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking more about the big changes that came about in the recent balanced data slate. And for this one I thought we'd focus on some of the units that were maybe most meaningfully improved for their factions, to the point where it seems pretty likely that we might see more on the tabletop. For this one I thought we'd talk through 10 units that might have at least some argument to be most improved in a meaningful way, talk about what they are and why they're good, and how much the points or rules changes helped them out. As ever, if you were looking to expand your army, or be tempted into new stuff that Games Workshop's given a lift to, then check out the channel's affiliate discount links in the video description. Buying through these guys saves versus Games Workshop. It helps to support the channel through any purchases, though as ever remember that models are the things that stay around, and Games Workshop certainly likes to shift rules and points around, particularly for the stuff at the apex of the game. Let's jump straight into it though, and first up we have the Astra Militarum Bullgryn. These guys have off and on been a pretty powerful unit for the Guard. They often tend to be competitively relevant just as their whole thing is about being big, tough and chunky. A melee unit for a faction that doesn't have many, and often the exact thing that will be trusted to scrap over the mid-board objectives and meet some of the enemy's scariest damage dealers with at least some hope of survival. In game there are 100 points for 3 of them, or 200 for 6. They're maybe not quite so meta at the moment that they make their way into every single guard list, but they certainly do show up in plenty of competitive ones, their biggest draw being that big durability, 3 wounds at toughness 6 with a 3+ save and a 4+ invulnerable, and then beyond that they're -1 damage, so particularly nasty against damage 2 and 3 weapons there, and on top of that they get a 6+ feel no pain, and between all of those barriers to damage there's a pretty good chance that a bunch of attacks fall down at one thing or another. Invulnerable saves removing a lot of damage, the -1 damage meaning that damage 3 attacks don't outright kill them, and then the 6+ feel no pain having the chance to make more go away. They tend to function pretty well as a midfield bully unit, being particularly good at punching down against sort of medium infantry and so on, with lots of strength 7, AP 1 and damage 2 attacks. Most of the units on this list are ones that went down in points, but the Bullgryns just gained absolutely massively out of that new Guard Grizzled Company army, which does look like it's going to be strong enough to be very competitive for the faction. The reason that they won quite so much out of it is they can now get orders with a commissar. You have a 30-point commissar with a 20-point upgrade for abhuman detail. He can join one of the units and gives the squad a leadership 6+, and chips in with his own melee stats as well. The enhancement allows him to order Ogrins and Bullgryn. He can either give them a weapon skill 2+ with fixed bayonets, so basically plus 25% damage increase, or can choose to give them +1 OC and +1 leadership, which sometimes can be a bit on the niche side, but for Bullgryn it's about as relevant as anything else, given they're really quite likely to survive on the mid-board, and having them all at OC2 is a really big difference. Just having those options will be interesting enough in itself, but due to the detachment rule it's actually far better than that. The core detachment rule means that he'll be able to order 2 units, not just 1, so provided you can keep that commissar alive, he can support 2 units of 6 Bullgryn with either of those buffs, and then on top of that, no matter what order you do, you'll be able to reroll 1s to hit, and then also reroll 1s to wound against things on objectives, potentially really quite a big damage boost to again a unit that doesn't really get many. Basically you take 2 units that are already incredibly durable and make their damage output far scarier. A squad of 6 of them for 200 points has 24 attacks, hitting on a 3+ at strength 7, AP -1 and damage 2, with a +1 to hit and rerolling 1s to hit. That's essentially almost a 50% boost versus just about everything, given that you will hit almost every single hit. And then if you get to reroll wound rolls of 1 against things versus objectives, the overall damage buff goes to +70% on what the unit might have done before. It's pretty big. On top of that, the detachment has also got access to Armour of Contempt as well. It won't always be relevant given the invulnerable saves, but if they've got some cover or the enemy attacks at AP 1 or both, then it could tip the difference. Overall seems pretty plausible that we might be seeing multiple units of 6 of them on the front line for the Guard. The commissar himself perhaps being a bit of a weak link though, is going to want to hide out of line of sight a fair bit if possible, as precision could lay him low. Next up, and sticking with big intimidating durable models fighting for the mid-board, we've got the Custodian Guard, where for the Adeptus Custodes it felt like it was a pretty even thing to either talk about them or the Alarisk Terminators. Both of them are improved by really quite a meaningful amount, and both of them were solid enough already. Either way, you can get a fair few more wounds of big golden armour on the tabletop if you'd like to. Custodian Guard in particular dropped down to 150 or 190 points, down from 160 or 200, which was already a decrease on previous. The Custodian Guard were already being played in some way in the majority of competitive lists. Several armies just went for the 1 unit, often with Inquisitor Draxus, given that their damage buffs can amp up her shooting. Firing twice and reroll all wound rolls is great on all her spammed damage. but plenty of lists were using multiple squads of them, given the decrease that they'd had last time. At 150 points, they're now essentially 37 or 38 points per model, and for that you get 3 wounds at toughness 6 with their high Custodian saves, a bit of Guardian Spear shooting with their damage 2 profile, double shooting once per game and the rerolls, and then most fearsomely their melee of course, 5 attacks hitting at strength 7, AP -2 and damage 2, with martial guitar for some sustained or lethal hits, whatever buff your detachment gives you, and potentially reroll wound rolls on top of that if they can seize an objective at the same time. They've got plenty of OC as well, and particularly if you put a Vexilla in the unit. It seems like a pretty similar gain in utility for the Allo's Custodians as well. They got a bigger relative points decrease, dropping down to 55 points from 60, so that's around a solid 8% drop there. Again, they're a unit that was used by most armies, though plenty of them in a slightly supporting role. Maybe 1 or 2 slightly smaller units for deep striking around the board and doing a combination of keeping up the pressure and maybe some objective utility. At 55 points for a 4 wound Custodian with the grenade launcher, the golden light redeploys, and the big damage buffs that they get against characters, monsters and vehicles, they look like they might be in more of a place to compete with the main line of the Adeptus Custodes once again. Overall, between those two changes, it feels like Custodes are going to be a fairly terrifying stat check, both for armies on the competitive and casual scene. Their win rates were already fairly solid in competitive play, though as ever I generally expect them to do better in win rates and on the more casual scene versus at the very tops of grand tournaments, just due to the nature of the faction and how it plays right now. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Titans Terrain. One option to get a battlefield worth of Warhammer 40k terrain on the board with their unusual system of folding cardboard tiles. The idea behind their stuff is that you basically have those tiles set out in a 3x4 grid, and that makes a 45x60 inch playing board, the right size for 10th edition Warhammer 40k, and then as you set up, each one of those tiles unfolds and up pops a cardboard building, so you basically have an entire battlefield that can be stored completely flat. It's really quite an unusual offering compared with the vast majority of terrain sets out there. The biggest advantage of it is storage and portability, as it fits in a box set around about the same size as a normal board game. You can transport it round to friends' houses relatively easily, and if you don't have loads of space at home to store a big terrain set, it could be a solid option there. Otherwise, it's certainly cheaper than Games Workshop terrain, and not having to do any hobby work to get it looking good on the tabletop isn't the worst thing for some people out there. They've got a few different designs available for it, and I'll talk through a few of the pros and cons at the end of the video. I feel like compared with some terrain sets, there's definitely a few more trade-offs for this one. In any case though, check them out if you'd like to, link down in the video description, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. Next up, we've got some Jet Black bikers of the Raven Wing, and the Raven Wing Black Knights got really quite a big and solid relative points decrease, dropping down from 90 points to 80 per 3 of them, and that's an 11% points decrease. They were considered a bit on the niche side for competitive play before. They still showed up in competitive lists, though maybe a bit more typically ones that are Company of Hunters or Stormlance focused compared with the rest, but still had the potential to be interesting, I thought. Now for your 80 points, you get 3 models with 3 wounds each, at toughness 5, a 3+ save, and a 5+ invulnerable, which like several bikers I don't think is totally awful for just 26 points, particularly not on models that can move rather fast at 12 inches and have OC2 for a little bit of weight on objectives compared with some. Their damage is a rather interesting mix, 2 shots each at strength 8 and damage 2 with overcharged plasma shooting, though going up to a big 3 shots per model within 9 inches. If you can get 6 of these guys basically rapid firing like that, then they're absolutely going to tear apart certain targets. Then their melee is also kind of an unusual profile. 3 attacks apiece at strength 5, AP 2 and damage 1 with devastating wounds, nice enough to bully a few enemy marines or 1 wound infantry. But then on the charge they get anti-monster and anti-vehicle 4+, so that means that you're very likely to at least get a good chunk of mortal wounds there, so you need quite a few of them to get in melee to think about one-rounding a tank. It can be led by the Ravenwing Command Squad if you'd like to. They give some bonuses to advance and charge, the option for enhancements in the unit, extra OC in the squad, and potentially healing models if the opponent does strike back and doesn't wipe out the whole unit. Most attachments can give some good stuff for them, including Wrath of the Rock and Gladius, though they go a bit next level in Company of Hunters and Stormlance, with the stratagems being particularly good to support them, and Company of Hunters in particular having lots of ways to get them the alpha strike on the enemy, as opposed to the other way round. Overall, feels to me that the 11% points decrease is probably going to be enough to tip the balance that they get played quite a bit more. I might just be a little bit on the wary side. They could be a unit that gets replaced in 11th edition though, being some of the last remaining firstborn modelled Space Marines. Next up, while the Storm Surge went down by quite a lot of points, it feels like perhaps the biggest winners of the tower were the Fire Warrior Breachers, dropping a big 10% from 100 points to 90 for a squad of 10. Though if you did look at that as the overall combo with a squad of those, a Devilfish and also a Cadre Fireblade to lead, it's more like 4 or 5% overall if you're seeing that as the whole offering. There have been pretty fun and solidly scary Tau units for the majority of 10th edition, maybe a tiny bit more on the niche side recently after the last sets of points changes. though they do well enough in the detachments that favour them. For people playing Retaliation, Cadre, or Recruit Hunting Pack, other things are likely to steal their limelight. For what they do when they get out of a Devilfish, you get 20 attacks at Strength 6, AP -1 and Damage 1 within 10 inches. They've got the Assault keywords to help get them in range, and the Devilfish also has the option to advance and drop if that should make more sense. If you're including a Cadre Fireblade for an extra 50 points, then you get +10 to their pulse shots, plus bonus things like his own shooting and any gun drones. You're going to be getting a pretty enormous amount of hits given that they have native ballistic skill 3+, so when guided that increases to a 2+, and you might have further buffs on top of that like rerolls from stealth suits. They're going to hit the enemy with the vast majority of their shooting whatever happens. And then with that big punchy strength 6 profile, you also get 2 reroll wound rolls against things on objective markers, so beyond toughness 12 things you also wound with the majority of them too. Even just with their base AP1 and ignore cover from a marker light, they're pretty well guaranteed to stack a brutal amount of saves on anything trying to take a mid-board objective. And there's other buffs available in certain detachments with either detachment rules or bonus stratagems. They quite enjoy anything that can give them a bit of AP. Then beyond that, they probably are going to die in return, but the opponent might have to at least commit something with a good amount of volume fire. At 9 points, a 4+ save with the -1 to wound from the Guardian drone isn't nothing. And with OC2, they're likely to be needing to be dealt with on the mid-board objectives. Overall, they're already a pretty useful unit that got a fairly solid points decrease. And for the detachments that favour them, we'll likely see a few more sweeping things off the mid-board, maybe having a bit of a rivalry with Pathfinders, which some lists also take multiple units of. Next up, in theory for the Core Codex Space Marines, though in reality more for the Divergent chapters, we've got the Storm Speeder Thunderstrike. This dropped down from 150 points to 135. That's 3 pretty quality, high AP, high damage shots with the Last Talon and Storm Fury missiles. They all hit on a 2+ as well, and it also gets a twin-linked Icarus pod. Against the right targets, it's certainly going to be threatening to do a fair amount of damage. By far the most important thing though is that it marks the unit for a +1 to wound in the shooting phase. So it's pretty excellent anti-monster and vehicle tech, and really quite a big boost to all the chapters that don't have boosted Oath of Moments, as otherwise you do have a bit of overlap with what that can bring. That one already gives you a source of +1 to wound if you need it, and it might well be focused at the thing that you've got your gunline pointed at. It was already at least a fairly popular choice for both the Dark Angels and the Deathwatch in particular though. Deathwatch have lots of scary kill teams with some mid-strength shooting, particularly the chunky Indomitor one. And Dark Angels often run with a fair bit of fire support. If you're perhaps leaning into their affinity for plasma, then some Redemptor Dreadnoughts with their macroplasmas or some Hellblasters would certainly appreciate this guy. It's very helpful for more normal stuff though, like say having Vindicators wound on a 2+ against most vehicles. At 135 points, it's had really quite a significant decrease. The +1 to wound against monsters and vehicles isn't going to be relevant every single game, but for the ones that is, it's going to be fairly invaluable. And it's not like it doesn't come with a fair amount of its own speed and firepower, though you could certainly play it very differently if the buffing rule isn't the main event. Next up, we've got a small but meaningful points decrease to the Ironkin Steeljacks of the Leagues of Votann. They had several other units drop in points cost, and both Bury and the Arcanist Evaluator got way more efficient. The Ironkin Steeljacks seemed like a particularly big winner though, given that they got a direct points decrease to a unit that was already good. Both the ranged and the melee version of their unit went down from 90 points for 3 to 85 points for 3. So while not the most enormous relative change, still enough to make them more efficient. For now a little under 28 points, you get a body with 3 wounds, toughness 6 and a 2+ save, so very sturdy and needing something beyond small arms to take them down. And then there's 2 different choices of damage output, either the spammed Vulcanite shooting, where you get 36 attacks at strength 6, AP1 and damage 1 with dev wounds. They'll likely be firing both in your turn and the enemy turn due to Overwatch hitting on a 5 or a 4. That Overwatch free if a Memnir Strategist is in the unit. Otherwise, there's the melee weapon loadout, giving the Leagues of Votann a big tough bully unit that can fight for the midboard. Their weapons there are plasma swords. They either get 18 or 36 attacks depending on if you've got a unit of 3 or 6. And they hit at weapon skill 3+ with a sustained hits 1, a strength 6, AP 2 and damage 1. It means that say if you had a unit of 6 of them for now the 170 points, you'd expect around 30 hits or so. And if you can get the army rule +1 to hit on the go against an objective marker early on, you could expect about 36 hits at that profile, and even stack up a pretty serious amount of wounds against tough stuff they're wounding on a 5+. Even with damage 1, a squad like that is going to be killing a pretty significant amount of Terminators on average, around about 4 of them if you charge them on a mid-board objective early on in the game. Beyond that, they've got Preymark crests for some precision against things on objective markers, and both units are quite big chunky ones that can take buffs rather well. Maybe the Bramfast Oathband sustained hits for the shooting unit, Reroll ones to hit and wound with firepower and need guard, and various ones have melee buffs as well, like extra AP or maybe +1 damage against monsters and vehicles for the Hearthband attachment. As they go, they feel like at least a relatively easy unit to use as well, just absolutely spams damage 1 attacks that are going to obliterate lighter infantry, and with both units having so many volume attacks and either devastating wounds or good AP, their spammed attacks are going to be relevant against tough stuff too. Previously, the majority of lists were using a unit or at least one of these guys, and quite a lot were using 2 or more, and it certainly seems they've gained an efficiency against their competitors here. For maybe a little bit more of a side grade than a direct buff, but a very interesting one, we've got the Lord of Change, the incarnation of the Changer of Ways, getting both of its shooting profiles boosted a little bit. He lost the damage D3 attacks and instead has damage 2 on the Rod of Sorcery and damage 3 on the Bolt of Change, at the same time also having the Rod of Sorcery attacks boosted up to 18 inches, so now he only needs to play keep away to that distance to be able to shoot things, and potentially could be further away if he has the Everstave. All around it's a far scarier profile. It's better against 2 wound things, as you don't have the chance of rolling 1s for that D3 damage. It's better against 3 wound things from the flat damage 3 from the bolt. The model can hand back a bit further, and the extra damage on the Bolt of Change will make it far more of a threat to monsters and vehicles. Overall, it feels like that much of a damage increase far outweighs the 8% points increase it took, going from 250 to 270. It's quite a nice firepower unit that can be warping around the board in Demonic Incursion, potentially finding it very easy to bring its magical firepower to bear on the right target there. And there you've also got the option of the Everstave as well, giving you a +2 strength on top of the datasheet's +1. So you've got a strength 12 Bolt of Change, a strength 11 Rod of Sorcery, and the datasheet rules also allow you to flex into either Ignores cover, sustained hits D3 or lethal hits depending on what's best. Overall, I certainly wouldn't be too surprised if it becomes more of a central model and even more of a relevant damage dealer than it is now. And I must admit, the Thousand Suns Allied Demon detachment suddenly looks way more interesting. Getting these fairly scary damage profiles on top of the Kabbalistic ritual buffs to their shooting, it seems like a pretty serious match. It's certainly not the detachment with the best supporting rules in the world, but maybe with just that much psychic firepower, that might be enough to carry it anyway. Next up, and for a slightly more straightforward one, we have Bjorn the Fellhanded. Again, he feels like another very clear-cut case of a good unit getting better. He dropped down from 170 points to 160, and it just looks like he got lumped in with all the other dreadnoughts going down by a similar sort of amount, so that felt like a pretty weird decision given that basically all the other dreadnoughts were some of the worst datasheets in the Space Wolf Codex, where Bjorn the Fellhanded was one of the best. A fair chunk of value comes from just rustling up 1 command point per turn when he's on the tabletop, or very handy for a melee army in particular, with powerful swings in close combat with heroic intervention or interrupting and things. But when he does commit to the fight, his stats are just generally quite good. 8 wounds at toughness 9 with a 2+ save, so good for Armour of Contempt if you have it. There's a -1 to wound, which will be pretty relevant against lots of anti-tank weapons that would want to target him, and a 5+ feel no pain. So on average, the opponent actually needs to chew through around about 12 wounds at that profile. Then for his damage, if he's using his Hellfrost cannon, that's either one big scary damage 5 shot, or a damage 2 torrent attack that could take out some enemy Space Marines, and in melee True Claw hits with 6 attacks at strength 12, AP 2 and damage 3, with lethal hits for a bit more added punch against tough stuff. Overall, he basically generates command points, which is great, and then was already adequately tough and dangerous to justify his inclusion beyond that, never mind dropping 10 points to be yet more auto-include than he was before. For the Tyranids, they had the revival of their Carnifexes. One of the single biggest relative points cuts of the Dataslate took them down -28%, though in the way that you'd normally want to field them, with 2 of them with Old One Eye leading the way for a big scary brood of them. That's around about a 13% decrease, which is a bit more tame but still very meaningful on such a big scary centerpiece unit. Previously it would have been 380 points, now it's 330. That big investment gets you 24 wounds worth of toughness 9 2+ save monster. When you get to Old One Eye, his wounds have feel no pain as well. There's a couple of different ways that you could equip the Carnifexes. They get a little bit of close range shooting. The many choose to go for Crushing Claws, plus maybe a Venom Cannon. I've seen some people using DAC effect style builds with just lots and lots of shots, re-rolling all the hit rolls from Old One Eye. And that gives you a unit that can both clear out quite a lot of enemy units at range and also still hit hard in melee given Old One Eye's attacks. Then for the datasheet rules, Carnifexes can get a surge move, so if the opponent's anywhere near them and doesn't want to be in melee, then it's probably best not shoot them. Or they can use some other things including Invasion Fleet. They'll certainly enjoy Subterranean Assault to deliver them into melee. Any big impactful stratagems from things like Invasion Fleet will be really good on such a big central unit though, say the 5+ feel no pain one for the non-Old One Eye Carnifexes. Previously they were a bit niche, though still appeared from time to time in competitive lists. The Carnifex datasheet, particularly alone, will still stand out bad, and even going all the way down to 90 points, I still suspect that you probably want them with all one eye, and might be looking at other units that aren't more Carnifexes beyond that. It does feel like a meaningful drop to the whole option though. Here's just a rough damage output for them from the recent video I did dedicated to Carnifexes. This one's going for heavy venom cannons plus crushing claws on the Carnifexes. That'll give you some shooting that's going to be more efficient against heavy infantry kind of targets, and then melee that can handle lighter stuff, but it's just stand out against really big tough things, so land raiders and big tough vehicles are what you really want to go for if possible. Then finally for the main units I wanted to focus on, we've got the Space Marine Eradicators. They dropped down from 100 points to 90, so a 10% relative decrease there. And they're basically the Space Marine tank destroyers, 4 melter profile shots per unit out to 18 inches, getting far dangerous within 9 inches when they activate the melter rule of course, though generally competing or bettering the other Space Marine anti-tank options per point for even things that they shoot at 18 inches. The reason is they reroll all hits, wounds and damage rolls, and while they're very swingy, if they get a wound or two through, it's going to be felt in an enormous way. Recently they haven't really been played quite so much for the role versus gun tanks, maybe more things like Lancers, Ballistas, Dreadnoughts, Vindicators or Repulsor Executioners taking up their role. If they are used though, it's maybe most commonly in either Firestorm Task Force or the Forgefather Seekers, as they really like having strength 10 on those melter weapons, and they also like to be able to advance and shoot to get them there, or maybe within melter range if they're able. They did feel like they were a bit niche and had dropped off in Space Marine terms before, though a 10% points cut is really quite a significant one. I suspect it is still partly going to depend on how much monsters and vehicles wind up being a big part of the current meta. If most of the big scary threats are there to counter are more infantry or elite infantry style ones, they're not going to be quite as relevant as a result. Finally, just to round up with a few honourable mentions, maybe not really fitting the bill quite so much as outright scary units, but paying a small premium for their utility. We've got the World Eaters Goremongers infiltrating into the midboard, and that just being a generally handy thing to have in the army. At 75 points they seem fairly auto-include and well worth having now, and they can still hit hard if you focus buffs on them, and otherwise the Sisters of Silent Witch Seekers for the Adeptus Custodians just seem rather stand out at 45 points for 4 of them to scout into the midboard. Just for screening and small unit utility, hard to see why you wouldn't have multiple units of them now. Otherwise, that's far from the only things that got meaningfully improved in the dataslate though. I still probably wouldn't expect them to be particularly meta, and more use for Imperial Fists and Iron Hands, but Terminator Assault Squads getting a big plus 33% damage buff was pretty fun. Catacomb for the Astra Militarum looked like they'll really love the new detachment, built-in rerolls and a bunch of damage stratagems that seem both good things for them. The Keeper of Secrets and Shalaxi Hellbane went down by pretty meaningful points drops at 30 points each. Bury Agneson and the Arcanist Evaluator both went down by really quite a lot for the Leagues of Votan. They were kind of niche choices competitively, they were far more efficient than they were. The Thousand Suns got multiple small points decreases to things that were already pretty usable. Small units of Rubik Marines dropping down, the Sorcerer and small squads of Zangor Enlightened and the Mutalith Beast all being relevant. Most of those were at least pretty small relative drops though, maybe the Bow Zangor Enlightened being a particularly nice one, with 55 points being nicely more expendable. The Tyranid Screamer Killer and the Chaos Marine Forge Fiends both have them competing far better, and the Grey Knight Interceptors and the Knight Defender, they were both units for their armies that were already solid, so even if they're not dropping by many points, anything helps out. Feel free to give any other shout outs to things that you should have been an honourable mention though. I'll leave that one there for now. Which of the units would you consider most improved from the balanced data slate? Look forward to hearing your takes down in the comments below. That's it for this one. For the end of the video, I'll just cycle back to the video sponsor in Titans Terrain to talk a bit more about their pop-up cardboard terrain sets. As mentioned earlier, I feel like these are ones that have some more obvious pros and cons versus more normal terrain sets out there. The folding cardboard does have some advantages and disadvantages. The main unique selling point of it is that it stores quite so compact and easy, fairly fast to put up and take down, and going in a box set the same size as a normal board game isn't going to take up too much storage space either at home or if you're going round to a friend's house. It's also far cheaper than Games Workshop terrain, though most third-party terrain is, and it doesn't need any painting or assembly, being ready to go immediately. For a few disadvantages versus other sets, it's a bit less sturdy and hard wearing versus the plastic and MDF given it's made of cardboard. It's designed to fold flat and you do need to look after it a bit more than other ones. As they fold, the buildings can't really bear any weight as well, so you're not really going to be able to put too many units in the upper floors or anything like that. The grid layout can limit a bit of flexibility as well, though you can get some by rearranging the tiles or rotating them. It might not be the worst just to have maybe 1 or 2 extra ruined walls or something to break up some firing lanes for 40k purposes. In any case though, for their specific sets, they've got a couple of different ones. Their Forgotten Furnace with a bunch of glowing chaos runes and burnt out factories and things. And then they've got a more standard Shattered Hive Ruined City style one with some blasted buildings and armoured containers and stuff. Each of the sets also has an expansion centerpiece bit as well, which is made out of 2 tiles pushed together to make one big building, a cathedral style thing for the city, and a great infernal spire for the Chaos Foundry. In any case, check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like to, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you'd like to support the videos that I make on the channel, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons get a few advantages, seeing occasional videos early, votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.